Welcome to Business Success in a Virtual World podcast, a resource of information for businesses to understand and embrace the innovative power of XR, VR, and AR. Each episode, we attempt to summarize what's new in this growing industry and highlight actual case studies of how these technologies are advancing success in business and enterprise. I'm Tim Bajarin, Chairman of Creative Strategies, and each episode I'm joined by Barton, President of ISM Inc. Together, we help our listeners navigate the ever-growing mountain of information and technologies impacting virtual worlds, the metaverse, augmented reality, spatial computing, etc. In addition to all the information presented in each episode, additional information can be found on our resource website, in which you'll discover news, products, and most significantly, over 175 actual case studies of businesses utilizing these inventive technologies. That website is found at www.ismguide.com. The XR Metaverse resource link is on that site. There you'll discover field service examples, training, customer service, manufacturing, and much, much more. It's a fast-growing and complex area destined to impact your business. Let us help you figure out the best strategies. Now, on to the next episode.
Last week, I shared a case study about BMW and how they've utilized and integrated virtual technology into their business operations. This week, we're going to take a slightly different focus, and we're going to discuss Apple Vision Pro, which Tim and I believe will become a significant tool for enterprises that want to create their own virtual worlds for their businesses. As we will discuss, businesses can use the Apple Vision Pro for marketing, for sales, for customer service, and many other business functions that could be a part of their overall AR, VR, XR strategy, including even digital twin technologies. Tim, I'd like to turn it over to you. I know you were one of the first people outside of Apple that had the opportunity to use and test the Vision Pro on site, and you have a solid understanding both of its design, its functionality, and its potential use in the enterprise. Tim, tell us what you learned.
Thanks, Barton. Yeah, it was fascinating. I was at the Apple event and got to actually see a firsthand experience with Apple's Vision Pro. I had the equivalent of a head-on experience with the headset, meaning I got to put it on, I got to go through the process, and to be honest with you, it was one of the most mind-blowing, immersive experiences I've ever had. And I've tested all the various headsets out there. I mean, I've played with every one of them. And I use the MetaQuest version 2 right now often. But when I put this thing on, there were a bunch of things that really stood out. Number one, the video quality and the image quality was stunning. Apple has done a very great job in creating a environment where the optics and the images are as sharp as possible. And they use a new chip that they have called the R1 that actually enhances the video in such a way that there's no delay. And if you've ever used a headset where you were doing especially something like a roller coaster or something with a lot of movement, you will know that because of that delay, that's where the nausea and some of that feeling comes in. Apple has fundamentally dealt with that using this new R1 chipset that takes the algorithms and makes it so smooth that you don't feel that motion and nausea that comes with it. The other thing that struck me is that they introduced or integrated a 3D camera. And that's absolutely fascinating in its own self, in two contexts. In the business sense, you are being able to use and create these digital rooms around things like Zoom, MS Teams, WebEx video calls. And they did something rather clever. When you take, when you use the actual Vision Pro, you actually take a picture of yourself. You turn it around, take a 3D image of yourself, and they have software that turns that into a digital representation of you so that if you're wearing the headset, people will actually see you as if it's you, not you wearing a headset. And in that particular scenario, I was speaking with a woman who was on another part of the campus, and I couldn't tell that she was wearing a headset. She just looked like her normal self. And that just speaks to the level of Apple going to extreme ends to make this thing as realistic as possible. The other thing that's important about understanding the Vision Pro is that it is a AR based system, meaning I can see through it. So I was sitting in the equivalent of a living room, and I had the headset on, and I could see everything around me. I could see to the right, to the left, up, down, and it was just the room. But when I activated a particular application, that application would then come up on the screen, and depending on the application, it would either present images in front of me, or it would allow me to actually get into the actual site. So one of the stunning things that I saw with this was they had a demo of a Jurassic Park-like environment where a dinosaur would come from around the corner, and I literally got up from the chair, the couch I was on, walked around the coffee table, and then stood in front of what was a blank wall. But that blank wall now turned into Jurassic Park. And I stood in front of this wall looking at this virtual image. And next thing you know, this dinosaur comes around and starts sniffing at me. And I mean, it walked out of the wall. It was one of the most fascinating experiences in virtual reality that I've ever had, because it was as if I was standing there in the actual Jurassic Park. And another thing that struck me was a demo that they showed where you were wearing the headset and actually videoing a kid's birthday party. And what was fascinating about that is as I'm watching the kids, basically they were devouring their birthday cake. I was sitting there videoing them, and it looked like I was with them when it was played back to me. And I thought that part alone was fascinating to me in the sense that, although my son is much older than he was as a kid now, I have a lot of videotapes of him and the birthday parties when he was young. But they're basically just taping of that scene. In this case, if I was going to do that and play it back 2 years from now, it would be as if I was still there watching the kids play and enjoy this experience. So one thing that strikes me here is the role of the 3D experience, which makes that experience immersive. Another thing that they did, which spoke to travel, which was interesting, is I was able to actually transport myself into a ocean scene. And they had a guy who was basically feeding sharks. And I was as if I was in the water with him, viewing what was going on. And that particular one struck me because I've actually done that shark dive in the Bahamas, and I knew exactly what was going on and what it felt like. And here I was doing the exact same thing, although I wasn't getting wet this time. But my point is that this experience, right off the bat, was groundbreaking. It was immersive, it was 3D, yet it was AR and VR. And I began to realize very quickly that Apple was onto something that could have a significant impact on the business world. Now, having said that, they then integrated a couple of applications to show how it could be used in business. One was a VR application of the use in designing automotive. They actually had a Formula One car where you could actually look at the car itself. You could look at the airflow going over it, and it was if you were standing in the chamber where that was going to happen. And then you could do the cutaways, of course, through that application. They did another example in medical where it was being used to teach heart surgery. And since I had a triple bypass and I wasn't there in person or in presence seeing it, this is the first time I was able to actually look at how they were doing the actual operation. And of course, this is being used for training surgeons. They showed another one where where it could be used for manufacturing, for design, and then there were some suggestions, even though they didn't have it in the video, how it could be used for marketing, sales, training, customer service, etc. Now, when I think about the vision of what we have here with the podcast on virtual worlds in business, the reality is that Apple has given us an amazing tool now for being able to use it in a different way than we are using it today. When you have all of these applications, for example, today where Walmart is using a Quest headset to onboard people, and it walks them through the training process. But you can imagine how this could be used for training in ways we've never even seen, by taking you to the actual device that you're needing to repair and doing things that we just haven't been able to think about in the past. And it's just one of those staggering technologies that, while I do believe in the end it's going to have a dramatic impact on the consumer's use of virtual or integrating virtual worlds for consumers, I think the major audience for this at the beginning is really going to be what we call vertical markets, that includes especially business, enterprise, and entities where this could add a very different experience to how you actually view, work, learn, train, etc. Now, in that context, I have a couple of recommendations, and then we'll get into discussing this. But I believe that because Apple is going to put a pretty big emphasis on business and enterprise, I think that enterprises need to not just sit on their hands and watch this happen. I believe that they have to get a team of developers, learn to use Vision OS and the Vision OS SDK. What's really important is that SDK, so that you could write apps for Vision OS, was released about a week ago. And as a result, an enterprise today could get together either an internal team or they could contract an outside team, and they need to start looking at how you actually could use this for your business. I suggest they assign this to an internal programming team or a third-party team, and begin developing the skills needed to use the Vision Pro SDK in their own system. At that point, once they can get a handle on what it can do, they need to begin to look at the concept and brainstorm how it might be used in their own business processes. And the idea there would be to create an additional pilot and figure out, fundamentally exactly what you can use it for within this. So my general sense after using this is that this is a transformational product. It's going to have a dramatic impact on the market. Now, whether Apple can actually make it a big success with consumers is a question because one, it's starting at $3,500. I do believe that over the next couple of years they'll get that price down and they'll make it even smaller. But the major focus on this first generation, I think, is going to have a dramatic impact on business, especially in areas like training, customer service, and sales. You can imagine being able to handle a product in a virtual showroom or in a virtual store. And we do this now. Barton, you've talked about the Warby Parker example where you can use this 2D vision of putting the glasses on and seeing what that might look like. But imagine if you were standing in that store and actually taking that and putting it on your virtual avatar and seeing it and from every angle. I expect Apple Vision Pro itself to have at least 2,000 Vision Pro apps at launch, which will be sometime in early 2024. Many of those apps first coming out will be business focused. I do think that businesses need to be very proactive in looking at the role that something like Apple's Vision Pro and others, by the way. I do think, there are significant products already out there from HTC and others who are already being able to let you do some of these things. After using the Apple Vision Pro and going through the demos, man, I just think that this thing is revolutionary. And I think that, one, businesses are going to be really interested in it. But I really suggest that businesses not wait around, that they actually take a proactive position and take a leadership role. And Barton, over the last months or so, as we have shared various case studies, that's exactly what we have shown. BMW has taken a leadership position. Procter & Gamble has taken a leadership position. And I don't think enterprises can sit back after this particular situation where Apple has introduced such an amazing tool to just sit back and let the market happen and then they jump in. I think they have to get in early in order to take a position on this and not necessarily put it into every aspect of their operations. That takes time. But I think that they should do a pilot program for customer service or for sales or for training right off the bat by getting hands on that SDK and getting someone in some of their programmers teams or third-party programmers who are familiar with the SDK, VisionOS SDK, to help them with the project. What do you think?
Well, Tim, I've known you for more, I think it's 3 decades. And when you say something like this is a transformational product, I honestly don't hear you say that very often. And I know you test a lot of different types of technologies. I also remember, it must have been the early 90s. No, late 90s. You held up the iPhone to an audience. We were at a conference.
It wasn't the iPhone. It was a small handheld.
A small handheld, and you told the audience that this is the future. You need to make everything in your business mobile, and that is what the customer expects. And as you know, that's completely come to fruition. And I remember when they took away the keypad from the cell phones, and everybody said you can't have a cell phone without a keypad. And I think you said, again, Apple's leading the way with transformation. And this is just something that I think is really excited you, and it makes me excited to see how much you see the how this is going to help businesses in the future. Before I kind of respond to why it's important now, I wanted to just pick up a point. Can you remind me what was the price of the Lisa, which was the predecessor to the Mac, before we moved into the Mac world? And what was the price of the initial Mac? I'm trying to make the comparison that actually $3,500 is not outrageously expensive.
So the original Lisa, amazingly, was $10,000 when it was introduced.
Yeah.
But that did not go very well, as you know. But it did allow Steve Jobs and the team to begin thinking about what should be something that was more transformational beyond the big size. I mean, Lisa was like a big IBM PC. A year and a half later, he introduced the Mac, which was a much smaller version. But even that was $2,500 when it was introduced.
So
Uh,
that's the point. The point is, well, it's something called the learning curve. We know that the price of things will drop over time just because you learn how to make them better and efficient, etc. And I think you've spoken a couple of articles you've written talks about, maybe the price coming down, maybe there being a version in 2 years in the $1,500 range or $2,000 range, and might be a smaller and so forth. The bottom line is they have come out with what they often do is a transformational product. Now, the question for the audience, I always, at least for myself and on our readers, is this new offering, which will be launched most likely Q1 of 2024. So there's lots of developers right now using the Software Development Kit or SDK. It was handed out, I think, on July or June 21st, so that people are fast at work. And Disney announced that there would be lots of different applications available. And the beauty for me is that Apple's detached or separated the headset from the App Store, where they're going to actually sell Vision Pro apps, business apps. And so now all of a sudden we can buy an app, we can use an app that exists. We don't have to create everything from ourselves, or we can configure or customize an app. So it changes the whole dynamics of how we're going to be building apps in the business world for a 3D world. But here's where I think it's important. Why now? And you've touched upon it. I just want to deepen that. The one thing you said is this concept of 3D, three-dimensional. And that's the big breakthrough. I think that's the way of the future for sales, for marketing, for customer service, for field service. You've mentioned training, design, entertainment, and so much more. You see, we live in a 3D world, and our loved ones and the things that we do at our work and in design and so forth, it's all in 3D. And yet all of our lives in front of these computers and phones were typically in 2D. And the customer wants to see a product in 3D. They want to be able to turn it inside out and walk around it and experience it. And what 3D does is it brings that opportunity. So using 3Ds, companies can then become more immersive and engaging in what is important customer experiences, which ultimately drives customer satisfaction, loyalty, etc. So an example, if you remember from the Gillette case study in this podcast, I spoke about how you could look at the new Gillette razor, but initially they introduced it through a Bugatti, the automobile, Italian automobile, and you could literally jump in the automobile and take it for a ride, and it was the same color as the color system as the razor. It was a kind of a bluish, sky bluish, and a gray. And so it was an emotional experience to first come into the Procter & Gamble Life Lab and see the Bugatti and, to test drive it, do a little bit of a gamification challenge with it, and then get eventually to the razor, which you could see in 3D being put together for the blade and the handle, etc. And it just made that customer experience real and emotional. And that was really important. I think that 3D experiences in that regard can lead to increased brand awareness. So you get a 3D vision, improved customer engagement. They want to kind of come in and play or be a part of it. Enhance loyalty, and ultimately, I really think you're going to see much higher sales as a result of Apple Vision Pro, people that are going to be wearing them both in business and on the consumer side. I can make a couple of observations on applications you talked about, Tim. So I see the biggest value on the Apple for sales. So Tryon, you've mentioned that, the Warby Parker, for virtual tours, whether it be in a laboratory, whether it be in a design shop, whether it be, as you said, in a heart surgery, or whether it be even on just taking a vacation tour. Interestingly enough, in the marketing side, I see it as a way of showing a company or a consumer, B2B, B2C, how you're using 3D as a part of making a better product. And Lockheed Martin did that with the Orion spacecraft when they sold it to NASA. But I've been looking at influencer marketing and how you can literally, with the Apple Vision Pro, get into a discussion with everybody else, and as a influencer, you can be among them, and that's like a really big experience for those that might be a part of it. I think the training is critically important. I think you talked about Walmart, but there's many companies. I think the one that always impresses me is some of the medical industries and some of the medical schools that are using this type of 3D learning to help somebody understand how to use a particular piece of medical equipment before they'll go out on the operating theater and do an operation. You've already mentioned design and manufacturing, etc. So let me give you another thought of why now. Apple has laid, as Tim has discussed and described, a very strong foundation to bring both AR and XR to the business and to customers globally. This is not just a headset. This is a headset. This is an operating system. This is a software development kit. This is a new Apple store. This is an entire ecosystem. And that, in regard, I call it a strong foundation. And then what they're doing right now, and developers are doing, is they're developing business apps that'll be used with the Apple Vision Pro. So Tim talked about, let's just say, what's called remote assist. You have a product or an airplane or an oil well or whatever that is broken, and it's far away and it's expensive to jump on a plane and try to send some engineers, and so you put on the Vision Pro headset and all of a sudden you're there, you're doing remote assist. Well, today you have to kind of build that remote assist. There are companies that sell it as a part of their headsets, but with the Apple Vision Pro, I'm envisaging that you can purchase a remote assist capability and bring it into your headset. So in other words, it'll be kind of done for you, which is very helpful. Businesses don't have to become programmers per se. They can be users of programs that have been built. So in that regard, a very strong foundation. I think another thing that's very important, you can trust Apple. This is a company who has brand recognition globally. It's a company who delivers outstandingly fine quality products. They take good care of their customers. They're just trustworthy, and so that's a very important factor in its own. Now, the other thing that's important is Apple's marketing acumen, and I think that together with the Vision Pro App Store will unleash all of these valuable business apps that we haven't even thought about, Tim. I remember when they first came out with the iPhone. How many of us thought about that iPhone would unleash Uber or would unleash Airbnb? And so many other apps that are now dependent upon this whole new way of doing computing. And the same thing is going to happen, I believe, on the Vision Pro. So, you ain't seen nothing yet, as the expression has it. The last thing I want to say on the why now is two very important cohorts that we have to keep our eye on. Gen Z and the one that follows that, Gen Alpha. So Gen Z, 1997 to 2012, and then Gen Alpha, 2012 and forward. But these are two generations that grew up using headsets, mostly in the gaming industry, but increasingly they'll be using it across the board. The forecast is that 70% of all businesses will be in the virtual world by 2027, and that Gen Z will be wearing a headset 50% of the time as they go about doing their work, their pleasure, etc. Now, again, I actually think these forecasts are correct, but even if they weren't, the bottom line is there's a generation, Gen Z, and a following just successive generation, Gen Alpha, that will expect this from the businesses. And then when they buy a product or a service or an engineering or a design, they expect to see it in 3D and join you and talk through it and so forth. So they're going to drive it. You mentioned the case studies. I am of a great belief that they're reading these use cases, and we have like 180 of them in the Metaverse Resource Center now. It's even more than that. And looking at some of the videos, because they can be very concrete, really is a nice way to understand how this is going to evolve, how it has evolved, and why you should get involved yourself. I make this observation. I think it's far too risky for any company to sit on the sidelines and watch competitors spearhead business using the Apple Vision Pro or any of the other offerings in a virtual world and be left on the sidelines. Like think about Xerox and think about Blockbusters and think about Borders. But, to be in a more positive way by taking a proactive position, I think you can really ensure your company's future. So that's why I'm so positive about this. The 3 steps I recommend, and they kind of mirror what you said, Tim. First of all, learn all you can about Apple Vision Pro. Learn all about you can about the metaverse and the virtual world. There's this, again, 180 cases in the Metaverse Resource Center. There's this podcast, there's many other sources, but just educate yourself. Become increasingly knowledgeable about the art of the possible. The second thing I want to reinforce is this concept of building a metaverse or a virtual world or an Apple Vision Pro strategy. And what I mean by that is just to sit down and ask yourself, okay, which segments, which customers, which products, and how are we going to think about this in a strategic perspective for sales and marketing, customer service, field service, etc. And then step 3, and you've already alluded to this, Tim, is to pilot. So you've built your strategy, you've got an understanding of what who you're going after with what product and concept, and now you're going to actually pilot it. And that typically runs anywhere from 3 to 6 months. It depends on the company. Some can do it in a month, some can do it in more, but it's a period of time where you're really figuring out how well did it work or not work, tweaking it, and then making it better. And I believe companies today, 2023, July now, really need to take all 3 steps, become more educated, build a strategy, and then build the pilot. So that's my take on it, Tim.
So I'm going to elaborate on the second point that you made there, in that we're not suggesting that you jump in and, just basically apply it to every aspect of your operation. What we're suggesting is that you take a dedicated segment of your business, whether it be sales or marketing, field service, etc., and do the pilot around that. This thing will evolve, I think, in a dramatic fashion. And I think it's going to expand faster than people think. We believe that Apple probably cannot build more than maybe 250,000 units in the first wave of this. And in my column that is just coming up in Forbes this week, I point out that I've been asked this question, who will be the first users of this? And I point out that there's a segment that we called early adopters. When I first started tracking early adopters in the early 80s, there were maybe 200 to 300 that we would have called early adopters. But now technology has become so pervasive. When I talk about an early adopter market, we're talking about 10 million. And there's going to be what I would call ridiculous interest in pent-up demand when Apple does bring out the Vision Pro, and that first 250,000 will get snapped up immediately. And that will only ramp up in the second year to an even more dramatic, providing Apple can build that many units. And while I know there's a lot of people who are skeptical, I think Apple's going to sell every one of these at even 3,500 to this early adopter market for the first 2 years. And it's going to scale up. Apple will scale that up because we know they're working on a less expensive product as well. But again, it's going to be the business world who is going to embrace it initially. And that piloting program and strategy is really important. This is where Barton and I have developed our practice here in helping companies really understand not only the virtual world opportunity, but how to build pilots and how to build these programs. Barton has done this dozens of times, hundreds of times, I guess now, over the last 30 years for all of his customers when they were building CRM apps. And I think that this is something that is so important right now that I just don't think you can sit on the sidelines.
Well, we're in agreement on that, Tim. And I might say, it's kind of amusing, but 200 early adapters, whatever it may have been in the 80s, and 10 million in 2023. I have one piece of advice for businesses: be one of those early adapters and get on, put stakes in the ground today. This is a real transformational product. This is a winner. And this is something your customers will be demanding of you in the future sooner than we think.
Yes. Well, Barton, looking at the Vision Pro, we again, and especially as one who's actually tested it, I can see I actually see that this has the potential of being delivering the concept of a new computer experience in the future. Will it replace the PC? No. I think that that's going to be, the PC itself will live on for decades. But I think this represents a new version of how we will interact with technology in the future. And I think it's going to happen faster than most people think.
Super. Well, I think this kind of concludes this podcast. Next podcast, by the way, I'll be introducing a very exciting medical industry case study. And I want to keep that a secret, but I give you the industry at least. Until then, on behalf of Tim and myself, thanks so much for joining us. Share this podcast with your friends. And until we meet again.
For more information on this and other case studies, please check out the website www.ismguide.com and click the link for XR Metaverse Resource Center. We look forward to you joining us next time on another episode of Business Success in a Virtual World.